Psychedelic mushrooms have increased incredibly in popularity in the last few years. Microdosing, macrodosing, hero dosing. In the news, we find promises that these mushrooms can cure depression and anxiety and can even help us be more productive. But what is actually happening inside of these mythical organisms? I'm Jasper of Fungi Academy, and I've been growing psilocybin mushrooms for over 12 years, and since 2019 have taught tens of thousands of microphiles from all over the world about these extraordinary organisms. Psilocybin. It all started in a Santos lab in Switzerland when Albert Hofmann, the same man responsible for the creation of LSD-25, got sent some interesting mushrooms from Mexico by a controversial amateur mycologist with ties to the CIA. More on him later. While studying the mushrooms, he isolated two molecules that he deemed responsible for the psychoactive effect of these sacred mushrooms. He named these molecules psilocybin and psilocin after the genus of his specimens. The genus Psilocybe, meaning the underwhelming psilo, bear, and cybe, head, bear-headed mushrooms, Psilocybe mushrooms, belonging to this genus grow all over the world, and most members are capable of producing these wonderful molecules that we know and love. Albert's specimens are known as Psilocybe mexicana, also known as Teotonanecatl, Los Niños Santos, or Pajaritos. These were the most sacred mushrooms to Maria Sabina and other Mazatec curanderos in the mountains of Oaxaca and other healers of indigenous population of the Mesoamerican highlands. Maria Sabina was a powerful medicine woman known as a sabia, belonging to a line of indigenous wisdom keepers who kept the sacred cultural use of psychedelic mushrooms alive despite hundreds of years of colonization and active efforts of the church to eradicate these practices. In the 1950s, she was visited by American banker and CIA operative Gordon Wasson, who wrote an article in Time magazine called Seeking the Magic Mushroom. By sharing her culture with Gordon Wasson, Maria Sabina unknowingly helped start a massive migration of North Americans into her sacred lands that left the mountains of Oaxaca, and Maria Sabina's life changed forever. After giving the mushrooms to Gordon Wasson, the spirit of the mushrooms stopped talking to her. Her community ostracized her, burned her house, and led to the death of one of her sons. Her generous sharing of her tradition with a stranger led to betrayal and upheaval. Although many people, including Gordon Wasson, made fortunes from these mushrooms, Maria Sabina died in poverty in 1985, suffering from malnutrition later in life. But as the tragedy of the neo-colonialistic hunt for these mushrooms continued in the mountains of Oaxaca, people started finding out that these mushrooms don't only grow in Mexico. Currently, there are about 165 species of psilocybe known to science. Interestingly enough, you see memes flying around like, magic mushrooms grow from shit, so can you. But in reality, most psychoactive mushrooms do not grow from shit at all. Globally, you have a higher chance of finding these mushrooms on wood chips, large grasslands, or mossy forest floors than you have finding them on dung. Psilocybe cubensis and Psilocybe atlantis are the only mushrooms in the genus Psilocybe that I am aware of that grow in dung, and most people haven't even heard of Psilocybe atlantis. Before we dive deep into Psilocybe cubensis and its alkaloids, I want to talk about the other genera that produce these alkaloids. Although the psilocybes are the most abundant magic mushroom by far, through horizontal gene transfer, the ability to produce psilocybin and other active compounds present in these mushrooms has passed over to other genera. Most notably, some mushrooms in the genus Panaeolus. These also grow in cow dung, but are significantly smaller and sometimes referred to as blue meanies. Laughing gyms are a dozen or so species of mushroom belonging to the genus Gymnopilus that have been found to contain psilocybin and psilocin as well. There are also mushrooms in the genera Pluteus, Canosope, Inosope, Folitona, and even a single mushroom in the genus Galerina that has been found with these psychedelic alkaloids. The latter is best avoided since a close family member of Galerina steglici is not known as the deadly Galerina for nothing. Although there are over 200 species of psychedelic mushrooms in the wild, if you ever had a psychedelic mushroom experience, it is very likely you've only ever had one species of mushroom. And that species is Psilocybin cubensis, also known as the magic mushroom, shroom, golden halo, cube, gold cap, golden teacher, San Isidro, or as we call them in the Netherlands, the paddo. And not to forget the hundreds, if not thousands of strains that have emerged from cultivating this mushroom. Some examples are B positive, McKenna, penis envy, tidal wave, hillbilly, enigma, and I could keep going here for a while. All these varieties belonging to only one species of mushroom, and that's Psilocybin cubensis. Psilocybin cubensis was first described in 1906 in Cuba. But unlike the name suggests, P. cubensis actually grows all over the tropics and the subtropics of our planet. I have personally found them in Southeast Asia, Australia, and Central America, but I know that people have found them from sub-Saharan Africa to India and even in the southeast of the United States. Although there seems to be large morphological differences, a study published in December 2023 showcased that cultivated cubensis specimens showed less genetic diversity than their wild counterparts. In popular terms, a cube is a cube. Although there is something to be said about albino varieties being higher in concentration of active alkaloids, as is showcased by psilocybin cups, competitions that are held to reward the grower of the most potent mushroom. Maybe you have heard of penis envy being strong, golden teacher being mellow, hillbilly being good for walks through the forests, be positive being good for telepathically connecting to your pets or whatever else people have come up with these days. Although these stories can be comforting for some or frightening to others, there is absolutely no scientific backing for any of these statements, and even the most veteran mushroom eaters are unlikely to tell one variety from another, so take all of these stories with a grain of salt. And remember, a cube is a cube. So, why do these organisms create these alkaloids? How do they work on our brain, and what's in it for the mushroom? In January 2024, researchers completed the biggest genomic diversity for the genus Psilocybe and found that the genus originated significantly sooner than previously thought. Around 65 million years ago, when T-Rex was possibly still ruling the earth, the genus arose, and with them, the genes capable of producing our beloved alkaloids. That raised the question, did dinosaurs get high on the same alkaloids as we have been? For the old school meme lords out there, the Velociraptor might have actually existed. The giant meteor that soon followed unfortunately wiped any Velociraptor off the face of the earth before they could figure out democracy. But amidst the catastrophe, the Psilocybes survived. It's still unknown why these organisms spent precious resources to produce our beloved alkaloids. What's the evolutionary benefit? Was it just to get us, and perhaps the dinosaurs, high? Some scientists argue that psilocybin and psilocin would confuse potential insects trying to eat the mushrooms. Some say that the toxicity would make larger animals vomit up the spores, so they leave the digestive tract before being fully digested. But as many scientists noted, psilocybe mushrooms appear infrequently, and it would be unlikely for animals to see them often enough to start recognizing a non-ideal food source. Even with that said, there are plenty of little critters that happily consume our beloved psilocybe mushrooms, and if we look at the purpose of any mushroom in the natural world, they exist to spread spores. Having little insects creep and crawl up in the gills will have them covered in microscopic spores, and that will then spread around the ecosystem. A recent hypothesis pointed out that just after the impact of the asteroid, both fungi and slugs and other gastropods prevailed in the rubble of the Earth. So some scientists believe that psilocybin prevailed as a form of snail detergent, but there's no compelling evidence that shows how our favorite alkaloid would repel these slimy creatures. To get into some other ideas on why psilocin and psilocybin evolved and are still present in some of the world's favorite mushrooms, we have to understand the neurochemical function of these alkaloids. When consumed, psilocybin is rapidly metabolized in the liver and turns into psilocin. This is crucial because without this metabolization, psilocybin would not be biologically active in humans or insects. We often refer to psilocybin mushrooms instead of psilocin mushrooms because it's a lot more stable of a molecule. Psilocin reacts very intensely to oxygen, degrading very rapidly and leaving the infamous bluing after the alkaloid has oxidized. After the psilocybin is metabolized into psilocin, the psilocin starts moving through the body until it finds its home and connects to serotonin receptors in the brain, most notably the 5-HT2A receptor that's also involved in the psychedelic effects of LSD, MDMA, mescaline, and a plethora of other psychedelic substances. When a substance binds to this receptor or similar receptors present in the nervous system of other mammals, reptiles, fish, insects, and arachnids, they produce the infamous psychedelic state. In flies, suppression of this neurotransmitter is known to decrease appetite. But is that truly the sole reason why psilocin and psilocybin exist on this planet? I don't think so. And I'm sure that if you're familiar with Terence McKenna's outrageous, fabulous stoned ape theory, you agree with me. If you're not familiar with this idea just yet, I encourage you to pause this video and watch Paul Stamets' incredible overview of the hypothesis right here. Now you're familiar with the stoned ape, we're going to build upon Paul's explanation of McKenna's idea. Although we're not focusing on what I'm about to share, I can't stop myself sharing McKenna's hilarious idea that low doses of psychoactive mushrooms would potentially be aphrodisiacal and therefore stimulate our proto-human ancestors to have large mushroom-fueled orgies, leading to groups that would consume these mushrooms more frequently to have more offspring. That sounds like a lot of fun, but I'm more interested in the relation between psilocybin and language. I believe that most, if not all, fungi are intelligent, sentient, and conscious. They simply can't interact with our world in the same way that we interact with our environment. Fungi interact with our world through biochemistry. And I think that psilocybin and psilocin are meant to act as a bridge of communication between animals and the fungal realm. To understand how this might work, we have to dive into the default mode network. The default mode network is in charge of our normal waking consciousness. I see it as a little person in your head processing all the information that it receives from different parts of the brain into coherent structure. The default mode network can act as a gatekeeper to filter out any noise from the universe that might interfere with our survival. All in all, a great tool to have, but unfortunately, in our modern lives, the DMN is completely overloaded, leading to stress, anxiety, and the many other mental illnesses that are a plague of our time. Psilocybin, but also other tryptamines and even meditation have been shown through functional magnetic resonance imaging technology to quiet this filter by essentially turning off this part of our brain, allowing us to connect to consciousness unfiltered. Rupert Sheldrake, a contemporary and good friend of McKenna, talks about morphic fields of consciousness able to be tapped into while we are in these expanded states. It's in one of these fields that I believe that fungi can communicate with humans. It's in one of these fields that I believe that fungi taught our ancestors language. It's an outrageous way of saying that in these expanded states, our proto-human ancestors got inspired to try and verbally communicate their thoughts and ideas. Language is attractive to all of us. Yes, we can feel attracted to somebody's physical shapes or pheromones, but true connection takes place through the way that we communicate with one another. I'm pretty sure that you watching right now, just like me, are attracted to individuals that are funny, that are good at communicating their emotions, that might share inspiring ideas or communicate through their arts, The specifics are all relative, but in general, the way that we communicate attracts us to others. So instead of looking at the stoned ape through epigenetic neurogenesis, I prefer to look at it through the scope of language. The individuals that were most open to the linguistic lessons of the mushrooms probably rose up as kind and courageous leaders. Those leaders have more offspring and pass down the genes and skills of the mastery of language to their descendants, continuing that line for millions of years until we arrive to anatomically similar humans around 300,000 years ago. For decades, this was just a hypothesis, and honestly, without a time machine or some other groundbreaking technology that I can't even imagine, we will probably never know for sure. But in January of 2024, the scientific journal Brain published an article called A Role for the Serotonin 2A Receptor in the Expansion and Functioning of the Human Transmodal Cortex. This study showed a connection to the stimulation of the serotonin 2A receptor, stimulation as we see coming in contact with psilocybin and other tryptamines, and the rapid expansion of our brain size, potentially grounding Terence's in the rationale of science. We might have co-evolved with these fungi. We might utilize psilocybin to communicate with extraterrestrial intelligences. Those ideas are exciting and incredibly interesting, but not as incredible as the actual change that these magical alkaloids bring to people's lives. Hundreds of studies, and we're just getting started, have shown that well-prepared guided sessions can have astounding results on the lives of people with treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, eating disorders, and a plethora of other mental illnesses. As of recording this, psilocybin mushrooms seem to be the cure for our society's sicknesses. I do like to remind you, watching right now, that we're working with organisms, not molecules. A recent study showcased that hot water extraction of Psilocybin cubensis, this is also known as a tea, seemed to have a higher success rate in helping people with treatment-resistant depression than the synthesized psilocybin counterpart. This shows us that the entire mushroom chemical cocktail is made to be consumed in its entirety, not in individual alkaloids. I think we are on the precipice of something great, but we still have to tread with caution. I wish it was as easy as giving all the world leaders mushrooms and our problems would be over. But while creating a better future, we have to learn from our past. The hippies in the 1960s and the 70s hoped that dosing the water supply with LSD would make for a better world. But as time went on, their contemporaries got over the fad, and thousands of them somehow still became bankers, politicians, lawyers, and I can go on, continuing the rat race they envisioned to escape in their 20s and 30s. Going further back, Emperor Moctezuma, the last emperor of what we now call the Aztec Empire, famously consumed Teotihuacan, which means the divine flesh or the flesh of the gods, to try and commune with Huitzilopochtli, the war gods, in hopes of getting some groundbreaking advice in his war against the Spanish. The Aztecs were both famous for their consumption of psychedelic mushrooms and their brutal, violent rule, showcasing that psilocybin mushrooms don't by definition make better people. Psychedelic mushrooms have obviously had an incredibly profound impact on my life and the lives of those that I know. But those mushrooms are no silver bullet, cure all and all. The mushrooms might show you the mountain, but you still have to climb it. It's our birthright to work with these mushrooms, if we do so desire. And most issues that arise are because these magical healers are illegal, forcing people to consume them in non-ideal sets and settings. Even with all of that against us, the World Health Organization, amongst many other institutes, believe psilocybin to be the safest psychoactive substance. If we spend the next decades refining our ways to prepare for these journeys, to create safer spaces to work with the mushrooms, and for sharpening our tools to integrate the lessons from the experience, I truly believe that these fungal allies can increase the quality of life for billions of people around the world.
You made it until the end. Thank you so much for staying with us
throughout the whole video. It's always such an honor to be working with the incredibly talented people of After School. And if you want more free mycology-based content right here on YouTube, I'd love for you to check out our YouTube channel, Fungi Academy. You can find the link in the description. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Really do appreciate it. I hope you have a great day and see you next time.